Am I to start? Should I start? It seems people are still coming in. Vale. I can see them coming in now. Okay.
Okay, so we start this second part of the morning sessions, and we are going to face now the topic of Eastern Amphora, and Paul Reynolds is going to start the presentation.
Well, some of the Eastern Amphora, because of course Egypt is in the east, and the Black Sea is also in the east. I'm basically doing the Levantine provinces, what I call the Levantine provinces, Greece, and Aegean, and Asia Minor. There are certainly other people better qualified to do the Aegean than I am, as I've never worked there. But Greece, I can maybe say a few things. Now, unlike Africa or Spain or Italy, in the east we have a major problem in certain places at least, and particularly in Lebanon and Syria, and that is the absence of any kiln sites. So we're really trying to assign some very important amphora types to not just to provinces even, to cities or even, of course, many islands. There are many Greek islands of which we do not know the amphorae that belong to them. And therefore, from the beginning of my time in Beirut, for example, it was really my attempts to work out the typologies and where they come from in this vast region, just from being in Beirut, was based entirely or largely on the typology shapes and, very importantly, on the fabrics and how the forms interrelate and through their fabrics, and then by sort of logically thinking of where they might belong in the Levantine provinces. So I'm just going to go around the coast, starting in Cilicia, Western Cilicia, famous type G199, pinched handle amphora. We have plenty of kilns, production sites surveyed. Anamurium is another production site, place of production probably, outside that area. And also the form was made in Western Cyprus, probably in Paphos, and thanks to Severine, probably also in Lycia. So it's because of the handle, which is basically a Cohen type. This is probably it is a wine amphora, and it is the Passum sweet wine, which is quite well known, made from dried grapes or raisins. It was a black and thick wine, and it is in the list of wines. It's quite well known. Talking about this is really to show how the fabrics, they break down quite nicely into blocks to give you some idea of where amphorae come from. I won't go into details, but here it just shows the quartz lime fabric, volcanic fabrics in Cilicia and Cyprus. Again, a very big problem because Cyprus and Cilicia, Eastern Cilicia, have very, very similar fabrics, and therefore where the late Rome 1s and importantly where Pompeii 5s come from is a problem. It's always an issue. Inland of Syria, it's all these calcareous white fabrics, and so on. Fossil shell fabrics along the Levantine coast, which is why lots of the so-called Cypriot basket handle amphorae, which we'll see in a minute, are actually not from Cyprus at all. They're from the Levantine coast. They're from Syria. They're from Ras el-Basit, etc. So the fabrics really are very important. Eastern Cilicia these are the typical forms where they're making Roman shapes, obviously Cohen types, very, very good copies of Cohen amphorae on the left, and then basically a wider version of it. You just stretch it out and you have the G198 and its sort of similar form, M54 on the right. They're both made in different places, different kiln sites. So we have this wide shape, possibly. Well, one could have said it was fish sauce, based on looks like a 21, but of course it's got these handles with a bifid handles. So we're talking about a wine, presumably about a wine amphora, but here possibly with something special in it, like maybe fruit or something. Maybe this is something that definitely needs to be investigated. Cilicia was famous for its fruit trees. And also another thing I noticed, may be wrong, but whereas in the West, Cohen amphorae copies, imitations are almost everywhere in all the provinces. In the East, it's a bit more selective, possibly. That is my impression, that they're not made everywhere. Although the Cohen wine type, the types of wine, making wine with salt, is very widespread. Not necessarily carried in Cohen amphorae or Cohen type. But here we have another, we're going down into RACIIC, and we have their version of a Cohen amphora in the middle there at the top, and at the bottom. These are two examples. I think they are RACIIC fabric. They're very heavy, full of all the volcanics, with the typical dipinto writing on or decoration perhaps on the bodies. Very common with late Roman ones and Pompeii fives of these broad strokes of paint. And on the left, we've got one of the forms which was exported quite a lot, this little amphora, about this big table amphora. What's in it? Well, possibly wine, another thing which has to be sampled. Of course, very few sampling has been done in the Levantine provinces. Beirut is one example where we have some evidence. And on the right, this what I call a transport dolium, because really these are very common all over the place in RACIIC, which suggests to me that the wine is fermented in those, and then some of them actually end up on ships, and they end up in Egypt, for example. Some were published, and also on wreck sites, on a wreck site in eastern Cyprus. It's quite possible that the wine was actually transported in these. The top is a classic Cohen amphora. It's just that it's got a dolium body. And we're coming down. This is all published a long time ago. The Tartus. We're actually in Phoenicia. Remember that Tartus Amrit is already in northern Phoenicia. It's not Syria, technically. And we have this Cohen type made there. Here they make the handle with a groove down it. It's not folded, or some examples. And before that, we had, in the same fabric, they produced these basket handle amphorae, which go on into the 1st century AD. So it replaces those. The basket handle amphorae in Cyprus, at least, are associated with wine and particularly oil presses. So we should bear this in mind. But one would expect the Amrit amphora to be a wine amphora. All these things need to be sampled. Yes, I want to also just show you the great variety of forms and types that there are, rather types and variants and forms in this region. It's really a lot. When we hit the 3rd century, Amrit and Basit are producing globular amphorae with a ring base here. It's a rather regional shape. What is in that? Presumably wine again, but it all has to be tested. Reminds me a bit of the Sagalossos amphorae. I should just mention them, that they are there and they contain wine. Well, great. So, but this general globular shape is something I did think about being a very sort of Syrian, probably pre-Roman thing. So it persists with a Greco-Roman tradition and a Levantine tradition. There's this relief which I saw in Oxford, a picture of it, and it shows it's basically a relief with 2 ships arriving in a port, probably in the Eastern Mediterranean, and you've got barrels in one and amphorae in the other. I think this amphora is the Paphos, one of the Paphos amphorae. If not, it's from the other side. It would fit a shape made in Syria also, in Amrit. But it's just to show that in maybe the 2nd century, because that's the date of that amphora, there are barrels going on ships from this part of the world. So this is something which we have no evidence of otherwise. We turn to Lebanon, and which is Phoenicia, part of Phoenicia. We have now major production of oil and wine. The wine is sort of okay. The oil, anyway, this is what happens in particularly the mountainous parts of Lebanon. And therefore, I always was thinking about this possibility of wine and oil being made inland. We'll come back to that point in a minute. This is my work on the Beirut amphora, showing how it develops through 7 centuries. It's all very well known. And the hole pierced through the neck here, not that frequent, it does happen. And here you can see the run of the pitch from the vessels. That is pretty common. And that's all that you get of it, is this sort of darker stain of the liquid. And now, thanks to Marshall Woodworth's MA in Beirut, we do know it produced wine. And Pliny refers to Beirutian wine in his long list, but they were really surprising. It was rarely exported. And in fact, Phoenicia did not export its wines, generally. This is what I can see. They export their dried fruit, which we'll see in a minute. Yes, one of the rare places we actually have kilns, thank God, is in Beirut, where I was working. So we have, I think, 5 types of amphorae. I should have presented them together, but we have the Beirut amphora, of course, and then we have this amphora, which here, a nice, almost complete one from Masada, with, and I've always assumed it had this base, this long base, and it reminded me of the Dressel 14, and I wondered if it is a fish amphora. It's on the list for Marshall to, where is Marshall? It's on the list for Marshall to investigate. I have to get some samples, but I think this could well be a fish amphora, and it's interesting that it's actually at Masada for that reason. Another type produced in that kiln, which is very rarely found, in fact not at all found in the city itself, is the one on the right-hand side there, which is related, the top, which is related to actually what I think come from northern Lebanon, just in terms of fabric, very lime-rich fabric, very dense, no kiln sites again, of course, but the very distinctive type here, pretty large amphora in this case, and another 2 fabrics here. The one at the bottom is sort of, well, no, it's sort of pretty similar. Anyway, North Lebanese types, and there are Hellenistic predecessors. The Greco-Italic, lots of them are made in this very similar fabric, and I've got one koan made in this fabric in the 1st century. I would suggest that in the Flavian period, it's when, when Rome takes over the rest of Lebanon, when all these kings die or murdered or something, they took over and annexed what is inland, the Bekaa Valley, etc. And that is when the mountains, and that is when probably all these production started up. And it's also quite well evidenced by the pottery, the date of the pottery on these sites. Another amphora I've found, which is very common in 3rd century levels, is this amphora here. And there are many variants. I've spared you all the variants, but this with a roundish handle, and I think it could be this example found in the Salamis necropolis, although the base is a bit doubtful. But it would probably look like that, or something like that. This strong ribbing, actually, you can't see it here. A dense fabric, and because of the glazewares from Tripoli, I wonder if it's not a Tripolitanian from Tripoli, i.e. isn't the Lebanese Tripoli. And Tripoli wines are mentioned by Pliny. These are all with calcareous fabrics. They are found in quite a lot of numbers in Beirut, but they're not from Beirut. These are probably also small containers from the mountains of Lebanon, northern Lebanon. So they could be oil or wine, but they need to be examined. And on the right, we have the Baalbek amphora, which, for technical reasons, because Baalbek didn't get independence until the 3rd century, they produce their amphora in the 3rd century. And they don't produce a Beirut amphora, which they should have done, being part of Beirut territory. They produce their own amphora, and it's a Cohen handle. It's got a groove on it, folded, but the base, it's a table amphora. So I presume this is a wine amphora. This is southern Lebanon, sort of southerny Lebanon. It's not quite right down the bottom. Shahim, or Sidon, and this is the Byzantine period, presses, oil presses, associated with the church. This is probably ecclesiastical production. The only amphorae around are these very large containers on the bottom here, complicated typology. And also, we should really recognize that there are imported these jars, which are very like the modern Ottoman, early 20th century jars made in northern Lebanon, and they were transported presumably empty and used for storage of oil, probably, or anything really, oil, wine, water. But they need to be analyzed. And then, of course, one of the main fantastic evidence from Beirut kiln site is the production of the little carrot amphorae. So we know they come from Beirut, or some of them do. Others are not from Beirut. We know from the French evidence presented by Serine. So the carrot amphora, and this is well described in Marshall and others, this twisted cone to carry dried prunes, figs, dates, and so on. So they don't export Beirut wine, but they do export the figs. And I suggest that if you go down a little bit, you come to shapes related to the later Agora M334, and these are South Phoenician into what is now modern Israel forms, but tiny ones, and they're typical of the 3rd century, except for, and I suggest that this is for dried fruit, and I think maybe Séverine has some good evidence for that. And I think that this large version on the right, one of them was found with figs, or dates. So even though it's so big, but anyway, it's just to show that that there are other products, but the dried fruit of this region is very important. And here, what happens in the 4th century is this massive expansion of wine production in the Palestina. You can see how all the workshops end at the Lebanese border. I won't explain why that is. What found on these wine press sites, you have M334. You have other types, one we'll see in a minute. So wine is a very likely product. Here's one from the Agora with a nice dipinto on it. And also found on those sites, you have this, what I call my type 14, which is actually, the rim is related to Tyrian amphorae. So it's all getting very complicated. But the body is a Beirut amphora, like the Agora M234. They're all related, and I presume them to be wine. But then you get these other things appearing with the same rim, but quite different bodies. All this stuff needs to be examined. Someone needs to look at this dipinto I have on one of these. The Tyrian amphora on the left, it's produced for centuries, until the 3rd century when it stops completely dead. This is almost certainly a wine amphora, but they could have had oil in it as well, of course. And it is basically a Phoenician-style amphora made during the Hellenistic period as well, and in the Roman period into the 3rd century. And on the only they don't refer to there are references to Tyrian wine. I've just seen it again in Pliny. There are also references to Sarepta wine, but I'm not sure if that's a late reference. I can't remember. But Sarepta and Tyre are right next to each other, so it could be that it's referring really to a Tyrian export, and they might actually be referring to M334. It's quite possible by Sarepta they might mean that type. And then we have on the right these King's Home 117s, very poorly defined amphora. And there are hundreds of these in Rome now from the New Market excavations. And presumably wine, but again, it all needs to be examined. Maybe Séverine can add something to that. And then in Palestina itself, Palestina 1 and 2 and 3, we have two shapes. We have the bag shape and the cigar shape, and they're made everywhere actually, although Caesarea is more famous for its bag-shaped amphorae, which are generally considered to be wine amphorae. The Gaza is more famous for its cigar-shaped. Both sites of those regions make both types of amphorae. Anyway, there are the ones in Gaza and also northern, southern Phoenicia, now Israel. You have them associated with wine presses. Just to throw you into Zeugma, 3rd century amphorae from Zeugma look like that. 2 types. No idea what the contents are. Well, guess as good as mine. And in the late Empire, we have calcareous, very common in Zeugma, but not from Zeugma. This typical production of large, various modules actually, 3 modules of painted amphorae from central Syria with Euphrates mix of ingredients in the clay. And also they're produced, as you can see from that pointer there, in the western, inland western Syria. It is these which are associated with the presses of found in northern Syria and Chelenko's press sites, where people assume that late Roman 1 came from. In fact, the only thing you get are calcareous sherds. I wish I'd found rims while I was looking there, but anyway, this is what we should expect to be made in the press sites. And this, is it oil production, oil for the Roman army, etc. They're found all over the fortresses in Syria. And a little one there from Apamea, its own new type. And then we're now going back up again to Pamphylia. On the left, I think, is a real Pamphylian amphora studied by Grace from the Agora. But she also said that the ones on the right, not the Zeist one, but are Pamphylian, but the fabric is completely different. It's full of pyroxenes, I think. And it reminds me of things from Cyprus, as it also does the amphorae from the southern Pontic region, like this Zeist 94. So maybe they're Pontic or maybe they're Cypriot. It's something that needs to be investigated. But that's where the fabric is key. Then Rhodians, thanks to Séverine, got this picture here of Passum wine. So Passum technique wine carried in Rhodians. We've heard of other things that could come in Rhodians. And that they go on till about the, well, I'm not sure how late these Rhodians, late Rhodians go, 2nd century. Not so sure if they go into the 3rd century or not. And then I've got this one on the right-hand side, a very Rhodian fabric, a new type, a huge amphora found in mid-3rd century context in Beirut. It's just to say that it's around, it's an important type. And then just quickly through Cohen wines, super famous. You putting salt and must, which I hadn't realized. So it's a combination of must and seawater. And it's not just Cohen's Kos that did that. There are listed Clazomenian and Ephesian amphorae wines were made in this way. Not always, but in the early period at least, early Roman period. And another thing is how, well, also they carried, did you say figs? Possibly figs? No. Oh, no. Anyway, how late they go is a problem. I don't think I've got them so late. What happens to Cohen types after the 2nd century, I think, needs to be looked at. And then we come down to the Cohen. The Cnidian amphorae on the bottom. I got confused. The Cnidian amphorae, the whole long life of Cnidians that go right into the 5th century. Presumably Cnidian wine, well known also. Just I thought I'd mention the amphorae from Melos, known to have carried alum, or thought to have carried alum, like the ones from the Richborough 527s, used for textiles and preserving hides and things, cleaning. Quite rare, actually, quite rare find. This is from the Agora. And then the Chian, this is Severin's picture. Chian amphorae, super famous, also very expensive wine, very well known, in the Hellenistic and early Roman period. And then, what have I got here? Yes, it's like, because they did not mix wine with salt in this case, so it has probably tasted nice. And there also is noticed that the lots of wines in the Aegean are quite dark and they are sweet, unlike lots of Passum wine is in the Aegean. And also they're mixing with honey. These are references about the Aegean wines, as well as spice wines, mulsum. And the other thing, apart from Chios, is famous not just for wines but also for figs. So they must have come in something. Well, they don't have to come in something. They could have come as they were in bags, but they might have an amphorae. And also mastic doesn't have to be carried in amphorae, of course. Well, is the late Capitaine II problems? Is the Capitaine II from the Aegean or the Black Sea? I said Crimea, based on the fabrics. Capitaine II, fabric-wise, it could come from either region. Both Crimea and parts of the Aegean have very similar background, geological profiles. But this is one case where we really need to sort out where it comes from. Andrea Pate has suggested it's Chios. Where are you? Chios. Is that right? Yes. So I'm not sure about the fabric. So, but this is a key thing. But maybe he will say something about that. But presumed to be, always been presumed to be a wine amphora. And Marshall is also has already analysed those. We're waiting for the results of that. So this is another thing that's going to come out from Beirut, the wine, the contents of Capitaine II. I won't say anything about Ephesian amphorae. I'll leave that to Tamash. Just to say that they are made, this type of one-handled amphora in the early period is made in many places in the region. It's a problematical thing. The fabric is key to work out, and various details of the shapes are key to work out where they're coming from. Pergamum, of course, I've got that in the next bit anyway. Pergamum is one of the sources, but this is the line of the Ephesian examples. And in the late period, you get this, as we'll see later, Samian Samos type amphora, or M273 type, which takes over in the last part of the production, I would say. This is Tamash's map, which is rather nice, and his suggestions, maybe he can take us through that at some point, of where the main types come from. I noticed that he's put Capitaine 2 where he's put it, behind inland of Smyrna. I'm interested to see why. The other thing I've got here are two, it's black and white photograph, but they are black. These are two types which do travel. I got them in Nicopolis in Actium last week. So we get this type of amphora, interesting, somewhere in the Samos-Ephesus orbit. Oh, this has not, it's moved over. Anyway, these are examples from Tamash of Pergamene versions, Cohen versions, and Sardis versions of these one-handled types. Interestingly, the Sardis one with one handle is produced very late into the 6th century with its very particular shape. It's a bit different. Dressel 24, well, now known to be, and partly because of a lot to do with the work in Testaccio, to be an oil amphora, and basically the Dressel 20 of the East is the Dressel 24. I don't know if anyone's done any chemical work on those, but we now at least know that some of them were made at Erythrae and others are made at Chios. This is the one that I think someone mentioned earlier, the Chian version on the left, and another variant, the Knossos 18, another fabric, another variant related to that shape. Yes, and on my favorite type in the Agora, this little version about this big, which is clearly the same fabric as Dressel 24, and the top is exactly the same, but it's a small module. So it could carry anything. That could carry something particular from that region. It doesn't have to be wine. It could be a small module wine or something else. And then I come to what I call the Samos fabric. Is it late Roman, Séverine? Is it late Roman 8 or late Roman 9? The Samos group, M273, etc. 8, I got it right. Anyway, the late Roman 8 class group, basically starting with the M273, I would say in the 4th century, and developing into these sort of, these very big amphorae, which are most well known from the Samian versions of them. But as you can see, they are made all over where I put all these rings here, Samos, Icaria, making them in the 5th century and into the 6th, I would say. And then some things with pure volcanic fabrics at the top, a version which I think, I haven't got that on here, a version probably from Phocaea based on the fabric. And so an interesting koine there of following this model, this shape, where especially the toe is very distinctive. And also at the bottom here we've got one in a buff fabric, which is very common in Beirut. We don't get these other ones in Beirut. We get the buff one here, presumably from somewhere down in the south, where I put the arrow, somewhere near Rhodes or somewhere like that, or even Kos. And then new work I've done in Greece now, the other part of Greece, sorry, not the Greek islands, mainland Greece. And Western Greece, I've been working in what is Epirus, which is part of Albania now, and also Western Greece. I've been working in Nicopolis. And we've got types which really are Epirot, one could say. The problem there is Epirot versus Corfu. They all have very similar fabrics, buff fabrics. But I want to just point out that we have loads of these amphorae, which are about this big, we'd say table amphorae, They are transport amphorae, they are pitched, and they're moving around. Exactly the same things found in Butrint as you get in Nicopolis, so they're traveling 100 kilometers or so. And they're made also, I think they're, I haven't got it here, Eritrea. Anyway, they're made in other places. The model for some of these shapes is a metal version, actually. And just to throw in, the Delphi, we know they have their amphora in the 4th century. That's the one over there in the middle on the right. And a new type, the Delici, this small conical amphora, which looks like a carrot amphora, therefore might have contained figs or something like that, or fruit. And then I want to stress that in Nicopolis and in Butrint, we have all these other things, these tiny containers. The one on the left was pitched. So these are for transport of goods, thinking of honey and something more solid perhaps. And in Nicopolis, lots of these little flagony things, which I don't think are for, I think they're for transport of wines and special things, food products. Corinth, Roman Corinthian amphorae, much finer fabric than the earlier ones. And yellowish like this, fine lime. And the typical type here, this is, because it's based on the Brindisi model, or the other way around, perhaps. Brindisi is based on, not sure which way around, oil, presumably to be an oil amphora. And the Dressel 25, which is, I just found an article from Padua with these. I think that is actually from that region also. I think it's a Corinthian region product. And then this type, which is a 5th century or later, small amphora, which is very common in the Agora. It's also common in Nicopolis. Just to show you that there's all this stuff going on, there all needs to be worked out as to what they contain. Peloponnese, the Laconian, so-called Laconian amphora, one handle, painted, must have contained something very interesting. It's exported quite a lot in the region at least. It's in Athens, it's in Butrint, in Epirus. We come to the Villa Roma 198, now Agora M235, which actually has no top. It's just the bottom of it, I think, M235. And I suggested that it was Cretan for various reasons on the fabric, but let's be honest, it could come from Messina, where they have been found, associated with the kilns. I think it needs to be looked at. The reason why I said it was a Cretan amphora was because of the second one. On the right, the globular Cretan amphora of the 6th century in exactly the same fabric, and showed in this and in the same place in the Agora, and they'll follow one after the other, the same type of grooving, which Andre suggests is actually the string used to tie them to hold the amphora together during construction. Could be, it's interesting. But that is a feature of this group of amphorae, same fabric. There are many fabrics of globular Cretan amphorae, and this is just one of them. It could have been made in the Peloponnese, but there are many other fabrics. Again, we have to know what's inside those. And a new type at the top here from 4th century, same fabric, painted. They like to paint them. This part of the world. Cretan wines, very well known. Maybe Severin will say more about them. Creticum, Passum here on one of these. And also I'd just like to mention this small type that Hayes mentioned from Knossos, type 41, some special product. I'm thinking, I don't know if it's from there or not, but I read about the Sidonian, quince, honey, and grape and quince wine. So these are all sorts of special products that, if we look into it, they may be relevant. Well, we're not going to go into. No, I'm not even going to bother. Cretan amphorae, there are 4 main types, etc., 5 main types. But all of these actually may be producing it's a very similar situation, I presume, to Eastern Sicily. So we might find that all these cities are producing their own variants. I don't know. It needs to be sorted. The CeiMar 57. Well, I've got here. I said it came from the most common fabrics in Butrint, very common shape in Butrint, are pale buff things. There are plenty of Cretan amphorae, like those horned handle amphorae, which are in the same fabric. So I don't have any problem with them being Cretan, and I would say they come from Eastern Crete, because the Haios Nikolaios production is in that type of fabric. So I think that's quite possible that people think that Cretan amphorae are all this hard, this red or yellowish fabrics, but actually there are lots on the east end of Crete which are pale and buff and granular and porous. Just to mention, on the right here, the late Cretan amphorae, which are very important for trade links, found especially in the Crimea. Oh, I've nearly done. Late Roman ones. Yes, I'm going back to Late Roman 1 and Cilicia because it's just easier as a theme. This is my suggestion of the development of Late Roman 1 and its predecessors. Pompey 5, presumed to be a wine amphora. In the middle here, at the top, here is what it really looks like. I think this is a complete one with a pointed base. So we now know what base my late Pompeian 5 had. It's a early 3rd century evolution, or a new type, perhaps. I don't know what's going on here. Whereas the Gallic copy, which is certainly made in Cilicia, Eastern Cilicia also, is a perfect copy of a Gallic amphora. Now we can see that it's actually closer. The late Pompeian 5 one is actually shape-wise closer to what becomes what I call the proto-late Roman 1, which arrives in the mid-3rd century, and so on. It develops into what we know now as the late Roman 1. That's another major point, which is that we would call all of these different amphorae, but in fact they are forms within one type. So, or it's not a class, they're within one type. So this is, if you had them separately, you would call them different things. It's actually all evolved from one to the other. Just to say that someone said that late Roman ones are produced in Syria. I don't think so. I think the classic late Roman ones are produced only in the provinces of Western Cilicia, Western Cilicia, and in Cyprus. Now I know from Alexandria that they were produced in the earlier part of the 5th century. They are very similar things, and probably Cypriot fabrics, not a late phenomenon as me and Dominique Pierry suggested. The other thing, of course, is that, as we said, they're produced on the coast. The wine will come down, I suggest, in hides. There are versions of them produced in Razabasit, but they're very rarely exported. And then just to say that in the late empire, at the end, when there are problems around Cilicia with the Persians, etc., the dating of these is a bit of a problem, but no. I'm sorry, I got that confused. No, in the 6th century, the Justinian's reorganization of supply to the Danube is behind possibly the production of late Roman 1s and late Roman 2s in various islands of the Aegean, well known now really, and with these stamps that refer to some sort of state control. We'll just end with the late Roman 2 with its possible early versions in the imperial period. I've never seen a Zeist 90, so this is Andre's suggestion that they would have to be the same fabric. And the earliest ones really are from the Corinthia. They are argolid. They are argolid fabrics. Those are the earliest ones I've seen. Well, I say that, we have on the right here, that is a 3rd century early late Roman II, if you can call it that. And that is not really an argolid fabric. Well, not that I can break it as it's in the agora, but it's a bit of a problem, that. But the most common are from the argolid, and also probably from Chios. There's some major things we have to sort out about the fabrics of the production of this type, which of course is an oil amphora. Well, almost entirely it's supposed to be an oil amphora. It replaces the dress of 24 in the late Empire, and it's found all in the Danube for that reason. Many variants of late Roman IIs produced possibly in Epirus, possibly in Cyprus because of the fabrics. Again, they're very like the CeiMar 57's fabrics. So all these regions producing their versions of late Roman IIs in the 7th century. This is 7th century deposits from Nicopolis, from Actium, even Corfu possibly. But all this sort of thing needs to be sorted out in the future, of where they're coming from. Late Roman 13, the end, and the end of this talk. Late Roman 13 produced in many of the same sites that are producing late Roman 1 are producing late Roman 13, but Cyprus included. That's it.
Thank you very much for this huge synthesis of a complex word. And we pass to the discussion. I think that Tamas Bezeski is going to point out some issues.
Thank you for Paul that he gave a really interesting summary about these Eastern Mediterranean things. I just would like to show some inscriptions which is connected with the contents, but starting with the Ephesus late Roman triumphorae, where is conditum, cond, abbreviation about, which is perhaps means that a conditum wine, which Apicius mentioned 2 different types, all of it prepared with honey and others, so it was a very spicy wine. In Ephesus region, several sources mentioned for the wine, Strabo, Pliny, Dioscorides, and it's interesting that they mentioned different part of it, Ephesus, like Figalites, or they mentioned the Bramnian wine, and this means that it, not just the amphora, but perhaps all the wines was called the region. I try to give a short summary about for the Ephesian production, because it's interesting for the composition what they produced. The 100 jar and the late Roman tree is, everybody knows that is produced there, but there are this so-called Dresser 24 and Rhodian and Capitaine 2 amphora also produced the site. How we know it? This is the 100 jar and the late Roman tree for the variation. Paul talked about, so I don't want to take the details, but everybody knows about from the Agora publication, because only one, this so-called Ephesus 56 type in the end. It's interesting because we know the small version, which is around 40 centimeter, and there is another version also which is 3 times bigger, but exactly the same form. Why we have to talk about for how is the fabric in the Ephesian production, because we have no kiln in that region. And was very important to take a very detailed pathological analysis. And in the 90s, Roman Sauer and Ulrike Uchar take for, you can see the green dots means that where they collected for the clay samples and also other ceramics. And the pathological analysis clearly say, take it for thin section and heavy minerals and give it very clearly which is the Ephesus region, the fabric, because all this east coast of Asia Minor, very similar. All of it looks like micaceous fabric. Go to the types. In the early Augustan period, produced this form. We have only just stamps, 3 of it in Ephesus and 1 in the Athenian Agora, no other inscriptions. In the 2nd century, they have some letters, and Mabel Lang interpreted as a date, means these letters. Later period in the 4th century, we have this pro abbreviation about, perhaps means that Italian wine, but a new interpretation, it means perhaps it was an aperitif wine for, there are in Ephesus in the wall about this kind of inscription. There is the other one, which is perhaps means that an apple wine. The previous abbreviation is interesting because it means that not sure that this amphora, which was really Ephesian fabric, was why they put it that kind of wine. The new interpretation gave it the possibility that, of course, this was in Ephesian. This 5th century's amphorae, we have just next to the handle this Aquino or something like that. But if it's true that there will be a wine with basil, this is the so-called Ephesus 56, which I mentioned. Complete pieces, we have several places. There is just a cross in the Ephesian version, and sometimes we have letters in this type, but no more information. I think very important if we look at for the contents, how was the capacity about for this? We counted the complete amphora based on the Athenian Agora material, and it means that the early period was much bigger the container than later. Jump on to Pergamon. Paul mentioned about that several places produce this one-handle jar. It's interesting that when we compared there was micaceous all of it, but a part of it, maybe the first 2, is close to Pergamon, the others in Pergamon region, especially for the volcanic components give this information, and some of it distributed very far away, like in Crete or in Pula in Istria. In the Sardes, we don't know more just about these 2 forms and also aphrodisias, but interesting about, perhaps I cannot see the form which is we have in Ravenna, but the aphrodisios inscription, probably if this is Ephesian production, interesting why this name there, or this is an Aphrodisian production is also interesting. I don't know. This is the which Paul mentioned about this koan production. It's interesting for very detailed, looks like the late Roman tree. Perhaps they know very well the form, and also a copy about this Ephesus 56 form. It's very clear that the production is local because the soil and everything is give the same volcanic components in the island. This is the Mastihari place. And finally, for the other form, which is looks like that everybody mentioned that a kind of late Roman tree or one-handle jar, but it's very important to look at for the base. And also when we analyze this form, it's clear there is a third kind of volcanic component, and we don't know the production area. And I want to give one, which is jump a little bit, but it was connected with the this inscription which found in Berenike, and they mentioned that in this which they transported in one stein, there was two Ephesian things, Lycian wine, and for the Rhodian is important, there is a sweet Rhodian wine was. Jump, this is which mentioned Paul, and also the koan information we recently found in Magdalensberg. And interesting for the Cnidian question, because in the corpus they mentioned the Cnidian, perhaps sure that wine, but in the picture he gave it not the correct, but next to are the two drawings, and it's perhaps a mistake, which previous day mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some more discussion from Séverine Lemaitre.
So I will try to face to the face to the room and people, and not to my colleagues. First, of course, I wanted to ask. It's bizarre situation to thank someone and look at other people, but I wanted to thank Paul for his presentation, because do a synthesis about whole amphora production in the East, it's quite impossible in half an hour. So thank you for that. First, I wanted to point out one thing. The last 2 days, one remark came again and again about during the presentation and discussion. This remark was this one: we have to think that one amphora type may have transported more than one product. Okay, which is the contrary. Is the contrary the rule we are following in the West. But in the east part of the Mediterranean Sea, scholars, especially working on the classical and Hellenistical periods, they consider that amphorae could transport different products. And I wanted here to give a special name, and also to cite a paper he published. This is Marc Laval, because he published in 2011 a paper called Socio-Economic Conditions and the Contents of Amphorae. So it was in the PATAPS 3. PATAPS, this is the Congress about the Black Sea. And it's a very interesting paper because it compares our way to work, West and East, and also about the contents of amphorae. So, also I wanted to say the name of John Lund, that asked a long time ago, it was in 2004, that researcher and scholars works about contents of amphorae. So we have to to give the name of almost of these two scholars. So, about Amphora and contents. Michel said we have a lot of work to do about African, but about Eastern, it's incredible the way we are late, because we have, in my opinion, we have to start with the typology and relate it to real origins and workshops. So I'm dreaming about an atlas of the workshop in the eastern part, just for the imperial period at this moment. But so to discuss about the contents of the Amphora, we have to start with real base and good basis. So I wanted to say that. About the sources that which we are working with to try to find which contents and which Amphora. We have, of course, painted inscription, but with I think a special situation for the East production, because we have a lot of discovered made in the West Amphora bearing painted inscription in Latin and also Greek language. Those inscriptions mentioned sometimes the nature of the product, so wine or honey or other things, fruits, for example. I'm looking to Ulrike because she published an inscription on the carrot-shaped, Levantine carrot-shaped Amphora. We've mentioned the fruit cotana. This is a little fig. So this painted inscription is very useful, found in the West, but on East Mediterranean Amphora is very useful for us. Of course, there's also the pitch observation, but after 2 days, I think it's not so useful to characterize the content of the Amphora. And also, we have some exceptional discovered. For example, Paul showed this Amphora. This is Colchester's 109. It was found in Avanches, in Switzerland, in the cave destroyed by fire, dated in the beginning of the 3rd century, and the Amphora was full with carbonized dates. So this kind of discovery could be also useful to determine the contents of the Amphora. So I have to be quicker. About this, the contents in the Eastern Amphora, we have wine. Paul said that. Fish products after the papyri, but actually, and maybe we have some evidence for transport Amphora. Yes, I remember now. Fish product related to Thasian Amphora. Olive oil, fruits, and I would like to point out also honey. Honey is mentioned in a painted inscription in a Cretan Amphora found in Narbonne. And in Latin, and the inscription tells mel flos. But in this case, the reuse or the secondary content of the Amphora is has to be this question has to be asked. So, what I wanted to point out is two things. I think interesting to focus on, and also to make future research about the fruits, exotic ones, but also spatial ones. For example, figs and plums, because in the literary sources, the most famous fruits, for example, figs, are coming from Syria and not in the west part of the Mediterranean. Yes, you want to add? Also Chios. So we have to, I think we have to make research about the fruits and the amphora, and also because special kind of fruits are at the origin of the formation of specialized types of amphorae traded to the West. So in my point of view, it's very interesting. And also, there's one thing I found very interesting is about the nature, special nature of the Greek wines imported to the West also. And of course, we can think about Passum, for example. So, qu'est-ce que je voulais rajouter d'autre? Ah oui, yes. I wanted to also to precise that the Cretan, all the works about Cretan amphora and also Cretan wines are the Antigone Marangou, of course, work, and also Jean-Yves Amphora, because they surveyed all the island and to find a workshop. So that's why we know well the typology of the Cretan amphora, actually. So I have just one precise, I have time? Question to Paul. Do you think that, I was surprised, do you think that Pompeii 5 amphorae are the late Roman 1 predecessor? Because...
Literally. Predecessor. I didn't say, I mean, they're there before.
Okay.
This has always been what I was saying, is that fabric-wise,
yes,
they serve the same purpose in the imperial period before the late Roman 1. I wanted to make that connection. That was not that I say it derived literally from that it was its predecessor as a wine container, and that was what I was saying, is that because the whole point of that paper actually was about the idea of a Byzantine and a late Roman production and forms, and I wanted to say that this idea of wine production and exports from that area had a long tradition, but it was in different amphorae. That's all I was saying. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then, as I can see how late Pompeii 5 develops, now we can see how actually fairly close it is to the proto-late Roman 1. And I know that the use of more, not only just the dates and figs and so on, but it's for cooking. So the important thing that's going on in the West is that they're using these things for cooking, maybe in new recipes or things which are relevant, and that's why they go to the East for these ingredients. And why it stops, actually. Maybe it stops later on, but it's all to do with what people are cooking in the Roman West.
So, few remarks. We have. We should try to keep a bit short, because in order to have some discussion with everybody. So Kansenol is also...
Yes. Okay. Don't worry. First, I prepared a lecture communication in about 20 minutes, but I give up. Don't worry. So I will focus on two important types that Paul and Tamás told about the consumption of these two in the case of Smyrna. During the first 3 centuries of the empire, it is understood that Smyrna covered the wine demand by the local producers, which were thought to have been produced in numerous centers located around Ephesus and the Mediterranean Valley, and of course Pergamon. This is evidenced by the amphora, Agora F65, 66, M45, and so on. In other words, proto-late Roman 3 amphora, with their proportions reaching to total 52%. It is also confirmed that this stable commercial relation continued to the 3rd century AD by the quantity of M126 type amphorae found in the excavations in Smyrna. Although these one-handled jars had been exported to various centers in the Mediterranean basin, they were found at most in Smyrna, except in their production centers. So I think we should not exclude Smyrna as a production center, as we have many variants and very different forms of this LR3 group. On the other hand, though the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, RACIIC 24 and its variants took place secondly in the importation of Smyrna. The origin of these wide-rimmed amphorae narrowing towards their necks like a funnel had not been determined for a long time. They have been exported in limited quantity to Rome, beside the important consumption centers in the Eastern Mediterranean. It has been recognized by means of latest research that their prototypes were produced in the workshops in the north of Eritrea, and their subgroups dated to the beginning of the imperial period were produced in Chios and in the south at Kuşadası. This type of amphorae, which are frequently attested in the northwest Black Sea and along the Danube River, have numerous subgroups, and amphoras similar to them were highly produced. The clay features of the RACIIC 24 amphorae produced in Eritrea and Kuşadası permit to identify the amphoras produced in these regions. Meanwhile, the identification of workshops producing these amphorae in Chios has demonstrated that jars similar to RACIIC 24 amphorae were produced varied regions by using different clays, and it can be suggested that they were one of the common forms of Aegean Sea. So, I stopped to go on this subject, but maybe we should add some more to the communication of Paul. For me, the RACIIC 24 amphoras are never produced in Klazomenai. We have to say this. Until now, we don't have any evidence, at least. And not even Theos, as you proposed. I don't have any evidence, but we don't have any concrete evidence. But in Eritrea, we have lots of refuse dumps and even kilns in Eritrea. So we are very sure about this production type. And on the other thing, that is communication, he proposed to mastic as a content of the Chian amphorae. No?
I didn't say it was in an amphora. I just said we should be aware that it's coming from Chios. Did I say Chios? Wherever
I
said
saw
it came from.
mastic.
Yes, but I didn't say it came in necessarily in an amphora. I was just saying in the general exports.
I'm confusing. Okay. Because it is not. It's a solid thing, so it's not possible. So anyway, of course, lots of things to say about this huge and important communication, but we don't have time, I think, and I give up the typology at the moment. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you want to answer or if we just start to raise questions, probably.
You didn't. I know you didn't mention Samian oil. I'm just very worried that RACIIC 24, which is an oil amphora in a very distinctive fabric, that in this very fine fabric with mica and so on, there isn't a late Roman II in the same fabric. So why? I'm interested to know what is the successor as a oil production. Anyway, that's just something. It's interesting to me anyway. I want to know what follows the RACIIC 24 in that region.
I have a lot of questions I put in a notebook, but I was only going to say something. I am not agree. I am completely disagree with the first point you presented in the presentation, that we have less information in Eastern Mediterranean, no kiln sites, that we know much less about the contents. We can see that in the last years, developed a lot in Turkey, in the Greek islands, and they found new kiln sites. Mr. Senol spoke now about Eritrea. It's a huge complex, also in Chios, in Kos, in Kilikia. Then we have also the works of Mr. Emperor in the 80s. He found a lot of places in the Canadian area. Mrs. Marangou also worked in the whole Cretan area. Then we have, I think that is a problem in Eastern Mediterranean. It's not you or you, no, it's of all of us that are working in the Eastern Mediterranean. Sometimes we have excuses, but no, we have a lot of epigraphic reference, a lot of literature about the wines, about the olive from this region. And we have also kiln sites. It's similar in the Guadalquivir Valley. They only excavated 2 kiln sites, but they really know because of survey. It's the same in Crete or in other areas. Then I think for the future it will be good to go further and not to have excuse, no, we don't know the kiln sites. We don't know the content of this, but we have literary sources, a lot of literary sources from the classical period. We have to go further. It's not a critic, it's only that all together that we are working in the Eastern Mediterranean, we have to reset, no, and continue from another point.
Point taken, but actually when I said that, if you're referring, I was really referring to the Levant, the Levantine case, and Lebanon and Syria as being a problem, and also in Western Greece, because that's where I'm working. It wasn't a general comment. It was, I know there are plenty of kiln sites, but it's just that certain areas you have nothing to go on but working things out. You are right there.
May I?
Yes.
In case of Asian amphora, Horacio is very right, and we have literary sources such as garum or fish salts in Clozomenai, but we don't have any amphoras. Oh, recently, 3 weeks ago, an article pressed and talking about salted fish installations in Demre. We are talking about 7 big installations in different pieces. But where are these amphoras? In Demre, and on the other side of Keko Island.
Yeah, for sure that is an example, but for example for Ephesus, we know they speak about the Ephesian wine, as Thomas said, and we have the amphoras, and more than one type, and a huge production. And also in Crete, the work of Mrs. Marangou was really good, and he put the literary sources and the amphora. Then we can do it in several places, not in the whole area for sure, but neither in the Western Mediterranean. But, yeah.
But also for the olive oil, we don't know too many amphoras, which is possible olive oil amphora. But there is an inscription in Ephesus which mentioned about that a strategos donated for the olive oil production or something, and we have no Ephesus olive oil amphora. And also sure that there was fish production there, because there is many evidence about it. But interesting for the analysis that they're using locally, not sea water fishes, but from the lakes they take it, because all the analysis is given just the mainly using for this sweet water fishes.
So I would like to do some remarks about Tamash's presentation. I've been very interested in the inscriptions you've shown, and surprised by one, the conde, that you interpret as conditon. I have some doubts about the possibility that there was a large-scale trade of conditon, which is a spiced wine prepared in medical context. So I think if your interpretation is the right one, I think it's a secondary inscription inscribed on an amphora or a pot used for this special wine prepared in a medical context or at home, I don't know. But according to me, there is no trace, no possibility of a large trade, but there is another possibility. Conde could also be a name, a proper name. And we have several condes, condion, condon. And as I said yesterday, we have two kinds of inscriptions. Those belonging to the trade phase of the history of the Amphora, and the second one is at the last stage. There are just notations, names of the owner of the Amphora, and I think it's exactly what happens with the aphrodisios. According to me, aphrodisios has nothing to do with the contents or with the shape, the form of the Amphora, but it's a very common name used in Eastern. So we have many inscriptions which have nothing to do with the contents. We should be careful about the interpretation of these abbreviated words. That's the same with pro. It's very interesting, this pro, that you interpret as a kind of aperitif.
Yes.
That's exactly like conditor. It's not something. It's something you prepared at home. You don't sell. There is no large-scale trade of this kind of product, according to me.
Perhaps you have a right, but I just used which the colleagues interpreted in. I'm just thinking possibility to this kind of wine, because this amphora found in Ephesus, and it could be strange if they secondary take this inscription. And the other one, there was found it somewhere in Italy. I'm not really remember but also a Letroman 3 amphorae, painted inscription about same Conde, but I have not seen the piece because it was in one publication in Archer Martin, published in 99, something like that.
It can be conditor if it is.
Yeah.
It is a secondary use of the Amphora.
Perhaps. And the other is we have no. It's million of amphorae exist about this Ephesian production, but we have no any other inscriptions about it. And which was in Athenian Agora also, just I accepted, but the new interpretation about this wine, which was in the Athenian Agora, but in Ephesus there is a list about for the different foods they mentioned, and it was together with this. I'm sorry, I have no picture about, but it was in one room in the terrace house, where was one part of the room different Amineum or other wines was also there, and this is a separate other room was food things like, I can't remember really, but this was together with a kind of, have to thinking about what does it mean.
I would like to just to add something, about pro. A colleague sent me recently a picture of a late Roman one, which is in Athens, yes. With the usual red Di Pinto, but there is just one more, which seems to be in the same ink as the rest of the inscription, and there is Pro, P-R, Omicron above, and a number. So perhaps there is a connection with the
Yeah.
But I have no idea about what. It's probably a wine, but Which
one?
I would like to come back, if I may, to the quality of the evidence related to the productive landscape in the Eastern Mediterranean. Having spent, I think, all of my scientific career in excavating one, it's perhaps best to reflect a bit wider. There's two things to bring out. First of all, the tradition of research in the Eastern Mediterranean has not been geared really for most of its active period towards questions which are related to artisanate and artisanal production. This is very much still regions that are weighed down by what I would now call consequences of classical archaeology in its most traditional form. Yes, young generations are there and are trying to set all their agendas, but it is still very, very difficult within the traditional classical archaeological framework. Secondly, yes, there is evidence, and of course there's various strands of evidence, but if you compare it within the general framework of Roman Empire, I think it is fair to acknowledge that the evidence is still very far, and I mean that there's lots of gaps in what we do, and this is not because of our fault. This is simply the extent, the evidence being extant and being available. But I think it is also related to the type of questions that we should be asking. For instance, I'm sorry, Paul, but I don't like you referring to kiln sites, because in the end, it is as if we're interested in connecting an amphora with a kiln, whereas actually we should be asking about questions about human choice, what communities are doing there, who is wanting to do what, and that should be our main interest. And this is what I find is still lacking in the general research agenda of the Eastern Mediterranean. That is that level of human interest, of human choice, of human agency, and of course of structures working against that or in conjunction with human agency. But that is a very typical research agenda which is still not deeply ingrained and embedded enough in Eastern Mediterranean archaeology in general. And as a result of that, I think the study of production and also content and whatever the agenda of this conference is, yeah, the results of the Eastern Mediterranean will therefore always be different compared to all the regions in the Roman Empire. And we simply have to acknowledge that this is a result of a tradition of research. And yes, there are new agendas being set, but we're not quite there yet, I must say. And we have to acknowledge that, and that's also a fair point.
I'm not going to ask too many questions, too many remarks, because it's already late now. But I think that what we have seen from this presentation of East Mediterranean Amphora, it's only one layer, or the top layer maybe, of the trade, of the economic exchanges in Roman times. These amphorae were, most cases were very small, and perhaps the content was quite precious. But this is only one aspect of the trade. I'll talk more in my presentation. Some observation. Capitan 2, I think it's very frequently found everywhere in the Black Sea, Lower Danube area. But also, I want to make a point that I've seen over 20 Capitan 2 from the Athenian Agora, and all of them had a yellowish substance which was characteristic with very strong smell, which seems to be mastic. We'll have to analyze. Second, We're talking only about wine and olive oil made in Levant, but nothing about fish products. Well, we know that this is a Phoenician area which they had a long-standing tradition in making these fish products. I think that in this context, I also strongly believe that those carrot amphorae were not for fruit. They can be reused for fruit, as it was the case with Dressel 21-22, but it seems to be a little bit too much to invest so much effort in making amphorae for fruits. We can eventually reuse old amphorae, or we can send in basket or other kind of containers. You don't need a special container for fruits. The shape is also typical for agar, it's similar to those more or less Sicilian amphorae. Also, regarding the Messenian amphora, I wrote in a recent article and showed their evolution, and I think that based on distribution grounds, they are quite certainly Peloponnesian. They dominate in everywhere in the Peloponnesus, and there are very, very few examples discovered in Crete.
Okay, we have serious problems that we should go to the next session. We have moved the restaurant, but so please, if you want to answer with very synthetics, and then we change to the next session.
Just my comment on that last thing, which was about the big amphorae from Cilicia, was that they have Cohen handles, which is why I said they were fruit in wine or something like that. That it's a wine amphora with something else in it. Otherwise, it would not be. Well, it looks like a garum type of amphora, Dressel 21-22, but it's got bifid handles. Therefore, it's saying, and it has the step and everything. It's saying it's a wine amphora, but a particular type of wine amphora, possibly given the background that it could be something to do with fruit.
Okay. Thank you very much to everybody. And well, what we have just seen is the complexity of these words that still needs many issues to be addressed more and more. And we move to the next session. I thank every of you for your very interesting comments and information. And we go to the Black Sea amphora with Andrea Ope, who is going to speak.